Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Through the Fire in the SBN Small Business Network podcast. I am your host, Ryan Wickline, and today we're joined by somebody who's been through on quite the journey. He is author, coach, and veteran, David Richards. How you doing today, David?
Ryan, I am doing fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on.
Hey, it's my pleasure. So the one question the audience probably wants to know most is, who is David Richards?
Oh man, that's a good question. I'm a storyteller. I grew up in the military. My dad was a Marine for 31 years. We moved around quite a bit. I lived in Japan. I got some stuff published when I was in high school. So I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to either be the next Stephen King or do something in Hollywood. And not knowing what the real world was like growing up on military bases, that was not going to happen immediately. So I joined the Marines following in my dad's footsteps. Spent 15 years on active duty before I realized that I was kind of reprinting my dad's life as my own. And so I decided that I wanted to get out and branch off. So I joined Cisco in 2006, published my first book in 2017, became a life coach, and have just been a seeker of truth my entire life.
That's awesome. So you're a best-selling author. What inspired you to start writing?
Yeah, probably, to go back, it was probably comic books. I grew up reading like Iron Man and the X-Men certainly before they were popular, before it was cool. Because when I grew up, when I was in high school, comic books was not a cool thing. I just liked the creativity of it. And my favorite subject in school was English. I got a story published in a magazine in North Carolina, and that story also got national recognition. And that was just kind of what I saw myself doing. But like I said, you don't know what it's like out in the real world growing up on a military base, because a military base is such a different world to grow up in. It's almost like its own universe. And you certainly didn't have the kind of the chain of custody that you do now, where if you have a child who's interested in film or something, they can go to like the Savannah College of Art and Design and do those kind of things. Like, we just didn't have that chemistry and linkage there. So, I kind of thought when I joined the Marines, I was going to put writing behind me. And about 10 years into my career, right before 2001, I started writing poetry. I just had an inspiration. I started writing poetry, and it was this kind of huge discovery. And I kind of wanted to write, but it was so hard to do that because the military lifestyle, you don't know when you're going to get deployed. You're moving every 2 or 3 years. And so when I finally got out in 2006 and I realized I might never move again. Like, I could stay in the same place as long as I want, as long as I'm in that job. And then I thought, well, I can start writing again. So I took 11 years still trying to channel my inner Stephen King. And I wrote probably 3 or 4 manuscripts, but I never finished any of them over that time. And it was so frustrating because it was something I really wanted to do, and I couldn't figure out how to make it work. And finally, in December of 2016, I started reading Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And in that book, he asks, what is the purpose of your life? And when I read that question, I was blown away. I was like, my life has a purpose? What? And so I grabbed a notebook and pen and I wrote my first ever purpose statement. I said, the purpose of my life is to help people find their purpose in life. And 6 months later, I wrote Whiskey and Yoga, my first book about finding your purpose. And that book went on to become a #1 international bestseller. And it was just, it was getting the monkey off my back and finally finishing a book. 2, it was the realization that my value as a writer might be more helping people grow rather than scaring people with Stephen King stuff.
That's amazing when you can finally step into your purpose and know exactly what you were created for.
It's huge.
I think that's something missing right now in today's world.
Well, it is. And part of it's because, I'll give you a great example. A year ago, I took a friend of mine to go see Dr. Jordan Peterson. So he is a great speaker and psychologist. He used to teach up in Toronto. And then about, 7 or 8 years ago, he started becoming, more popular, and people started gaining recognition about him, who he was. And he came to, I live in just outside Raleigh, North Carolina. He came to a performing arts center here, and he spoke, and the topic he was speaking on was really, really deep. And I'd read part of his work, and so I kind of knew what to expect. But the friend I'd taken with me, brilliant guy, but lives his life on kind of social media. And having to listen to someone talk in depth for an hour is a very different experience than a 30-second soundbite on YouTube or on Instagram. And part of it is there is such a preoccupation by looking at what other people are doing online. You kind of have to pull back from that a little bit and get clear on what is my purpose? How do I contribute in a meaningful way? And doing that means you have to step away from FOMO, the fear of missing out, because there's always a party. There's always something you could be doing that's going to be so amazing and so incredible. Make your own incredible inside of you and see what happens from that.
Oh, that's some great advice. So you've written 4 books.
Yeah.
Can you explain them to the audience?
Yeah.
Give a little synopsis.
Yeah, I'll try. It's cool because one of the books, someone reached out from Los Angeles a few months back and asked if I thought about turning one of the books into a screenplay. So I'm working on that right now. I'll give them to you in the order that they were written, and I'll just try to explain my growth as a writer. So the first one was 2017's Whiskey and Yoga. And that was, like I said, just about helping people find their purpose in life. It's a really short book. It's only about 150 pages. And it's kind of reflective of the social media short attention span environment where each chapter is only about 3 or 4 pages long. And it's just a quick tidbit on here's how you help find your purpose. When I published that book and it went to number 1, I was really happy. And I kind of thought that, okay, I've made it. And someone came to me and said, well, how are you going to help people? Like, what's your platform? What are you going to talk about? And for some reason I thought purpose was overdone, like Tony Robbins and all these other people. And I just thought, oh, it's not purpose. It's got to be something else. It took me about 18 months and I had an idea for my next book, but about 18 months later, I had the inspiration for my next book. And so in 2019, I wrote The Lighthouse Keeper, which was really cool because it was a fiction story, but it also teaches a lesson. So if anyone's ever read The Alchemist, it's very much like The Alchemist. And that's actually the one that I'm turning into a screenplay right now. And it was the idea that was born from my practice as a yoga instructor. I like to get my students to think about different ways to look at life. And so on one occasion I said, your mind is an ocean. And that's where all your memories of all your experiences and everyone you've ever met is in your mind in this ocean. And your awareness, or where you place your attention, is the lighthouse. And most people just let their lighthouse go on autopilot. So they're reacting to life all the time. But if you really want an extraordinary quality of life, you get to take control of your awareness and direct that lighthouse to where you want it to go. And I was happy because I wanted to write fiction, even though this fiction had a message to it. And I was really proud of how the book came out. I had a great editorial experience to make the book better. And the book came out in March of 2020, right as the pandemic was happening. At the same time, I was coming out of a relationship. So in a 3.5-year relationship that I thought was going to be it. And then I realized that she and I were better friends than we were ever going to be anything else. And so I had the weight of that. And that weight kind of led me to have an idea for my third book. And my third book initially wasn't going to be spiritual or religious in any way. And I started working on it in January just to try to keep myself busy from dealing with the emotional turmoil of the relationship ending. And then the pandemic happened. And then I had some really deeply spiritual things happen in the first 3 months of the pandemic, including seeing this image of a woman on Instagram that I immediately was sure that I'd seen somewhere before. Like within 30 seconds, I'm like, I've seen this before. And that became the inspiration for my third book. So it took a complete detour. It took me 2 years just to come up with the title for that book. And then finally, I published that in December of 2022. And that was Love Letters to the Virgin Mary, The Resurrection of King David. So really kind of a beautiful pandemic story came out of that. I actually wrote 2 more books in the interim after publishing that one, is trying to figure out, okay, well, what am I going to write next? And I've been working with a coach from the Tony Robbins community now for about 3.5 years. And I had finished one of the books around this time last year. It was probably mid-May. And I had a program to go along with the book. And the whole idea behind it was your life is like the hero's journey, like all the movies, like The Matrix or Iron Man or Superman. It's the hero's journey. And it's through facing the dragons of your life and overcoming them that you become a greater version of yourself. And I was really pleased. I thought this book is going to be it. And my coach was like, yeah, but your program is just a performance. It's still not right. And I was like, oh crap. So, but in that I had revelation. I thought, well, what is the greatest test of faith? And the greatest test of faith to me was, has Jesus conquered death or not? Like, how do you consciously embrace the reality of what his resurrection is meant to entail? And when I asked myself that question, it led me to kind of the epiphany or the revelation. It was like, I'm going to write a book about becoming one with Christ. I'm going to look at King David's story because of the nature of what David has promised as an eternal kingdom, one that Jesus will establish. And then say, okay, based on that and based on what Jesus says about his relationship with the Father, and no one comes to the Father except through him, what would that mean for David? And if David's story can be archetypal and a reflection of humanity's story, then is that a pathway out of the Bible and the realization of how you bring heaven to earth together? So that book became Becoming One with Christ, The Lessons of King David, and I just launched that last week.
That's awesome. Man, those titles, I mean, like whiskey and yoga to where you're at now. I mean, what kind of spiritual journey did you have to go through to get to that?
Well, and that's a great question. And it starts when I was really young. Like I said earlier, growing up on base it's a really safe community, because you think about it, everyone, I grew up on Marine Corps bases. So everyone, 98% of the people on the base are Marines. Their families are military families. So no one locks their doors. Crime is almost non-existent. And it's a very just safe community. For 4 years of my childhood, from kindergarten through third grade, we lived in the real world, outside of College Park, Maryland, in this town called Hyattsville. And it was wild because it's like my dad was the only Marine on the block. We lived obviously close to DC because he worked at the Pentagon. But this was also back in the prehistoric times in the 1970s when Vietnam was ending. That was not a popular war nationally in the country because it was the first war that was broadcast back to people from the battlefront. And my best friend at the time was this kid named Danny. So I was probably 6 when this happened. And Danny lived up the block from me. He was my age. I have a 3-year-old brother who's 3 years older than I am. Danny had a 3-year-old brother, Matt. And then they had another brother, David, who was 12. So we used to hang out all the time. And back in the 70s, there was no helicopter parenting. As a 6-year-old, I was roaming the neighborhood. So I could be like half a mile from where I lived, and my parents didn't care. It was just that was the 70s. The thing about Danny was he used to get really angry. Like he would go, we called him a spaz, and he would just, it was a temper tantrum, but it was violent. Like he could get violent and destructive, and to the extent where his brothers would sometimes have to hold him down. And so one time we're in a stranger's backyard, because again, no supervision, and there was construction in the backyard, and there was a hammer on the ground. And so we're playing, just doing whatever. And then David, Danny's oldest brother, says, okay, it's time to go home and eat. And that, for whatever reason, set Danny off. He wasn't done playing. So he starts to get, like, his face just turns red. His eyes bulge from his head. And his brothers try to go to calm him down, and it's too late. He picks up the hammer and cocks it back to throw it. So everyone starts to run. He lets the hammer go, and it hits me in the back of the head and knocks me out. And the next memory I had was I woke up. He's at my house with his mom. He's been crying. I've got a bandage on my head. He gives me a coloring book, and everything's good. What I had put out of my mind until the pandemic was I remember being outside my body and watching his brother carry my lifeless body down the street. And I was like 15 feet behind him. I couldn't get back into my body, but I could see, like, me. I could see his oldest brother, David. I could see my brother. And I just couldn't get back. And I didn't realize that I had blocked that memory out. So to kind of summarize from that event up until the pandemic, as a kid, I could become temperamental. I almost became like Danny in some sense, that I could have these really angry moments. It was never really violent like he could get sometimes, but I just used to have these moments. And then by the time I was a teenager, we spent 3 years in Japan. and I came back for 8th grade. And then that's when I started to realize that I'm not fully present. Like I'm not, because that part of it was I had started getting into meditation in Japan because of like I could appreciate the samurai and the ninja, the culture and the heritage and the history of Japan. And I was really, it was romantic to me as a poet, as a writer. And then I joined the Marines and I put all that aside because the Marines, there's no room for crying. It's manly. And I'm surrounded for the first 2.5 years, I was surrounded by 95% men. So there's lots of testosterone and lots of like lift heavy things, eat, Hulk, smash, drink. And I did that. And then I started to feel this disconnect, which led me to write poetry. When I got out of the Marines in 2006, it was never part of my plan. But the week I got out, I left active duty on August 11th, 2006. And on August 12th, I took a yoga class. And it wasn't part of my plan. I had no designs on it, but I read a Sports Illustrated article about NFL players using yoga to strengthen their core. And I lifted weights. I'm like, well, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. So I went to my first class. And it was like this gentle style yoga. I was like, maybe. Like, I didn't even break a sweat. What is this? Like, this isn't a workout. 2 days later, I went to a different style yoga, different instructor. We're 30 minutes into class and I'm drenched in sweat. I'm like, what? From moving my body? Like, what the heck is this? And then you get to the end of class and the instructor says, okay, now just lie down and be still. Like, be still? What? And it was magical because I had this moment of stillness. I had this moment of presence where I was like fully present. I wasn't worrying about what had gone on in the past. I wasn't worried about the future. And I was like, oh my God, I want more of that. So 9 months later, I became a yoga instructor. And it was in some ways, I had not been practicing faith from a Christian standpoint for a long time because I had this download early in my life that I was going to find a woman that was somehow going to connect me back to God. And it was this romantic fairy tale notion that I had as a kid. And that led me through my journey, but that led me to look at women first. And then there wasn't any room for Jesus or anything else at that point. And that's kind of what led me on my spiritual path and journey.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot to unpack right there. I mean, you talk a lot about, and I think most men are to blame for this, that we are chasing women instead of like God and our faith, Christ,
Yeah.
Like, where did that journey lead you down to, like chasing after women?
It led me to 2 marriages and divorces, and then the end of this relationship in 2019. And it also led me to get really introspective. So as the pandemic started, I was living with family. Like we had my ex-fiance and I had shared a house together that she owned. And so we split the bills. And when we broke up, I thought, okay, I can get my own place and pick up from scratch. But you know what? I'm launching my next book. I've already got an idea for the third book. Let me take some time because I have not processed any of what I've put myself through for the past 20 years. And part of it was in 2000, and I say it because it's so significant. In 2017, I started going to Tony Robbins events. And if people aren't familiar with Tony Robbins, I certainly encourage you to check him out. But in doing that, you start to unpack, well, what do you really believe? Like, what beliefs do you have and what beliefs are holding you back? And I never really consciously thought about how my structure of belief might be inhibiting me from having a greater impact or fulfillment in life. And at the same time, it's what do you value? Like, what are your values? Do you value joy? Do you value peace? Do you value confidence? Whatever. And then what rules do you need to have to make those values come true? And I never looked at that, my inner psychology really. So the pandemic starts unfolding and I have also this strange sense of optimism because I'm like, you know what? The end of this last relationship was a good thing. Like that was supposed to happen. And now the pain from that relationship, I get to sit with and process because I haven't processed any of the last 2 decades. So I started working on this book. And then when I saw this image of this woman on Instagram, it was the first weekend in April of 2020. And it was beautiful because it was this unbelievable burst of creativity. What I discovered in the next 2 years is from a psychology standpoint, Carl Jung was a famed death psychologist in Europe, and he looked at kind of the four elements to who we are. There's the self, so that's the whole sense of who we are. There's a persona, and that's the mask that we wear socially. There's an anima or animus. So the anima is the feminine aspect of a man. And we all come from mothers, so there's the feminine aspect to us. And the same is true for women. There's a masculine aspect to them. That's called the animus. And then there's the shadow. That was the fourth element of Carl Jung's sort of spiritual architecture for the human psyche. And what I kind of realized was, and I think this is true for men, to answer your point, because men chase women, they're looking to almost awaken the feminine inside of them. And it's not to emasculate them. Because what I found is when you recognize, for me, seeing this woman and having her be the inspiration for me to write love letters to the Virgin Mary was huge. I mean, it certainly tested my faith, but it also, okay, well, let's reconcile that then. If you can come up with this story, there must be something to it. And what I realized was, by acknowledging the anima, the feminine part of who I was, it deepened my sense of masculinity, because now I could go from a place where I could honor all the women in my life, not try to put one above all the others because of something I saw in her or something I wanted from her. So in some sense, all this chasing, as frustrating and as painful as it had been, to now find this person. And I mean, there's certainly layers to her that are worth mentioning at some point, but to get to that point and realize, well, the wholeness of being comes from integrating all parts of who you are. It's not from separating. And when you try to separate the feminine part of you as a man, then you are basically enslaving yourself to a woman or to women in general. And so it's been, to me, like it has changed my relationship with men. It's changed my relationship with women. It's deepened my sense of who I am, because I realize, I mean, Carl Jung, he didn't just come up with this stuff like to make a buck. Like, this was years and decades of research. And when you realize it's necessary to bring all those parts of you together into one to form the self, to form the holistic sense of who you are, then you have to take a look at all parts of you. You have to take a look at your shadow. You have to, and that's Through the Fire is such a great heading for a podcast, because you have to go through the fire. There is a fire that transforms you. And it's by facing those parts of you that you don't necessarily like, that you integrate them into who you are and become a greater sense of self.
Yeah. I mean, that's where I got the name for the podcast, because of what I've been through in my life. And like I said, God had led me through the fire.
Yeah.
Like, it was not easy. I had to face myself. So you talk about, like, earlier about facing your dragons.
Yep.
It's like, what does that mean to you?
So in Jung's perspective, because that's probably the easiest frame of reference, is there are parts of us that we repress or we project onto other people. We say, oh, and I mean, if we look at it politically, if you're a Republican, you say, oh, the Democrats, they're trying to ruin the country. Or if you're a Democrat, you say, oh, the Republicans, they're trying to destroy the country, or something like that. Or it's this person is that, or this person's that. And what it actually means is you see a reflection of you and you don't want to own it, so you put it onto someone else. And as you so just brilliantly stated, when you face the fire, you have to face yourself and overcome yourself. That's often the greatest challenge, because we've created this ego, and that's more of a Freudian concept than it is Jung, but we've created this ego of who we are. And it's overcoming that really is the dragon. And what you kind of realize, to turn it into language that's probably very relatable for people, if you think about movies, most movies follow a formula, and it is the hero's journey. There's, like, Joseph Campbell wrote a book about this called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and that's a blueprint for Hollywood. So if you think of Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, he has this crisis that happens, and then he has to go through all these trials, and he faces his greatest challenge, and then at the end, he's Tom Cruise and he saved the day. Or you think of, more Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man. He goes from being this narcissist who's self-absorbed and loving to making the big ultimate sacrifice in Avengers Endgame to save the entire universe. And so but to go through those journeys, you have to strip off the parts of you that aren't aligned to serving a greater good. And that to me is, certainly if you look at it from a Judeo-Christian perspective, that's the fire, right? The Holy Spirit is the fire. And there's a great Jordan Peterson in his last book, We Who Wrestle with God, talks about the Gospel of Thomas has some really good quotes in it, even though it's Gnostic and not considered part of canon, but it's in filth it will be found. And what Peterson says is that which you most want to find will be found where you least want to look. And he always says that there's a dragon guarding the treasure. Whatever you're after, there's a dragon guarding it. And that's what you get to overcome in order to get to the treasure.
That's true. And everything when you look at it, I think every man's on their own hero's journey.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
So you talk about the idea of Christ consciousness and awakening to our divine identity.
Yeah.
How can you explain this in a deeper rather than disrupts the faith of someone that grew up in a traditional Christian worldview?
Yeah. So it's a couple things. First, the one is, and this is discovery through my own journey. I had no designs to become a yoga instructor, and part of it sort of was offensive to my Western upbringing too, my Judeo-Christian upbringing. And yet the more I got around the community and the more I went to classes where I heard instructors say, you're not your body, you're not your mind, you're the consciousness behind those things, the awareness behind those things. I was like, well, it seems true. Like I can see that I'm not my thoughts. And like, there is a consciousness to me that isn't my body. And it started to make me I started to just kind of want to understand that a little bit more deeply. And that led me actually into quantum physics, because quantum physics is all about the immaterial nature of reality. Like Einstein said, this is obviously when the planet only had 2 billion people, not 8.5 billion people. But he said, if you took all the physical matter of every single human being on the planet, all 2 billion people at the time he said this, it would fit in the size of a sugar cube. And at the heart of quantum physics is everything is energy vibrating at frequency. And it took me, I think I probably started researching that maybe in 2014 or 2015. And it took me a couple of years because I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Like, what is the quantum physics is what? But then you start to get it. You start to like, okay. And I got into Joe Dispenza. So Joe Dispenza's written a couple books. His last one, I think, came out in 2019 called Becoming Supernatural. And in that, he prescribes to people how you can do a very deep spiritual meditation to get scientific outcomes. And what I mean by that is he talks about the third eye, so your pineal gland. And that isn't obviously talked about directly from scripture unless you talk, and Jesus says you can fit, if your eye is healthy, then the light of the world kind of speaks through that. And if you go to the Vatican, I was in the Vatican last year, and if you go to the Vatican, when you go into the first courtyard, there's a huge pine cone in the heart of the courtyard, and that's related to the pineal gland. And then if you can go online and see Pope Francis. I'm sure Pope Leo has it too, but there's a staff that he holds, and it's got Christ on it. It's got the crucifix, and the foot of the crucifix is a pine cone. And so it's like, well, there's this pine cone in Catholicism. But these spiritual practices and the meditation that he teaches, they have documented scientific evidence from Dr. Dispenza's work that people have cured themselves of cancer, people have cured themselves of Parkinson's disease, all through the power of intention. And what you really discover when you get deeper into it is Christ taught that pray as if what you're praying for has already been received. And that's basically what Dispenza teaches in his workshops is act like if you have cancer and you don't want to have cancer, act like you don't have cancer. Like, what would it feel like to you if you were cured of cancer? And that's part of what down regulates the cancer causing proteins and up regulates healthy proteins. It's remarkable. So as I got into that work, it's almost like if you've seen the movie The Matrix with Neo and he takes the red pill instead of the blue pill, you start to see, well, there's something else. There is something supernatural or mystical or miraculous in the world. And the Christ consciousness comes from the idea that I think it's 1 Corinthians 2:16 that says we all share the mind of Christ. And if you think about that from a strictly religious perspective, you might say, well, okay, Christians share the mind of Christ. And I would say, well, no, if we all share the mind of Christ, then Christ is a universal consciousness. And this comes back to Carl Jung, because Carl Jung had patients from all over Europe. And what he found was, even though they had different backgrounds or came from different countries, they all had common themes in their dreams. And so he came into this realization that the subconscious is our pathway towards accessing this universal consciousness. And to me, that's what the Christ consciousness really starts to become then, because it also ties back to when Jesus says, I am the light of the world. To me, that is a perfect representation of quantum physics. Because if you only understand Newtonian physics, then you must see the world in 3 dimensions. You see, it's like you can't help but see it. And that's because that's how Newtonian physics is measured. We measure separation. We measure the physical separation of things. If you start to see the world in quantum physics, then you see it's all connected. It's all energy. You're a different human being, obviously, than I am, but there's an energy that connects us. There's an energy that connects my office, my computer, all these things. And so if you look at the Christ consciousness from an elevated standpoint scientifically, you see, well, if Christ is the light of the world, and we're the light of the world, because he says that about us as well, then we must be able to tune into that light. We must be able to see that light universally. See that light is, if he has all authority over heaven and earth, then I should be able to see that light everywhere, regardless of what someone believes. If I believe Christ is the universal consciousness and he is the light of the world, then I should see that light everywhere. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that's very, very deep right there.
You asked for deep.
Yeah. I mean, that was one thing I did learn too when I went through my conversion, was that we're all searching for God. Like
Right.
Every single person has that God-sized hole in their heart, and we're all searching for him in some sort of way, and being led back to him.
Right.
That we just we're so distracted anymore that a lot of us can't hear him talking to us and leading us to him.
Yeah, well, and that's such a great point. And honestly, and literally, I just wrote about this for my next course. As 2020 began, part of what I was journaling, I was really excited about my 3rd book. And this was before it became Love Letters to the Virgin Mary, but I was really excited by the premise of it because I felt there was a passion to this, and it was like, oh, there's something here. And I started journaling to myself that I wanted to reconcile my relationship with God. Like, it was time. I didn't have a sense that the pandemic, I think it was just starting to make the news in January when I was writing. I didn't know what it was going to become, what it was going to become. And yet, when you earnestly start to seek, you will find. Like, that's the whole premise. And that's not just, this is another great point to bring up. That's not just speculative. There's something that we all have called the reticular activating system, or RAS. So if you've ever bought a new car or a motorcycle, and then suddenly you see that car or motorcycle everywhere, they were always there, but because it's become important to you, your RAS starts noticing it. So if you are actively looking to seek and reconcile that relationship, when you actually consciously do that, you'll start to see it. And it could be, if people are familiar with the law of attraction, that's based on Christianity. Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, speaks very explicitly to, him talking to Vanderbilt or someone, and they're saying, like, what's your secret? Like, how do you become a self-made millionaire? And he's like, there is an infinite intelligence in the universe gifted to the West in the form of Jesus Christ, and you communicate with that, and you operate from a place of faith that what you want will be achieved, and that's how it happens. And so you get to this understanding, and it becomes really profound, because you realize it's all within us. Like, that's the thing. I mean, Christ even says the kingdom is within you. And if you look at John 14:23, he says, those who love me will obey my teachings. Well, what is his teachings? His 2 commandments: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. So that's a vertical love, an internal love of God. And then love your neighbor as yourself. That's a horizontal. So that's the cross, right? That is the vertical and horizontal connection. But what does he say after that? He says, those who love me will obey my teachings. My Father will love them. We will come to them and make our home in them. We're like, well, wait a minute. So now we're supposed to be habitations for God? Is that what John 14:23 says? Yeah, it is. So then you realize, well, if that's the case, then I just finished reading, there's a great author, a British bishop and theologian called N.T. Wright, and he wrote a book called Surprised by Hope. He's gotten a couple of really great books, but he talks about we should be living from the standpoint that resurrection should be our outcome, like the idea of resurrection. And that's kind of what led me. I can't say I consciously made that decision to do it this way, but I backed into the subtitle for Love Letters to the Virgin Mary being the resurrection of King David, and then started reading that, there's plenty of scripture that says King David will be raised up. So that was really cool. So there is this sense that there is a God-sized hole. I love what you said. I think the shift that we're seeing with the contributions of people like Jordan Peterson, because if you read his last book that came out last November, he talks about the story of Elijah and how Elijah basically says, we don't find God in the earthquake or the hurricane or the fire. We find him in the internal, the still small voice of conscience. And when you realize that also lends itself to the Christ consciousness idea that if I am trying to seek something, I'm going to be answered by the spirit of that which I'm trying to seek. So in other words, if you and I are best friends and I want to play a joke on you or prank you or something, I'm going to be attended to. If I say, how am I going to pull off my prank? Then I'm going to come up with ways to do that because the spirit of what I want to accomplish is pulling off this prank. If I have an idea that is counterproductive, that's actually going to like cause you harm or make you really mad, I'm going to dismiss that because it's not ultimately my aim. So if you apply that then to, well, if Christ consciousness, if we all share the mind of Christ from what 1 Corinthians says, then I should be able to ask questions to my conscience inside of me and develop that relationship internally to then embody what he says in John 14:23.
Yeah. That's, like I said, that's very, very deep and like kind of like what everybody's kind of running away from.
Yeah.
It's like instead of looking in, we're seeking other things. So what advice would you give someone that felt God calling them to their purpose, but were scared?
It's such a great question. When I had the inspiration to write Love Letters to the Virgin Mary, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I had a couple things that happened leading up to that were like, the pandemic. So the end of this relationship, pandemic, I went to a mastermind with Jack Canfield, who's a legendary author, who sold more than 500 million copies of his books. And he gave me some really strange advice. I did a Joe Dispenza meditation, had a really mystical experience. And then I saw this woman and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is all connected. Like life happens for us, not to us. Then this is all connected. This is fantastic. And by the time I got to the summer of 2020, really July 4th weekend, I remember I was terrified because I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is about Jesus. Like this is about my relationship with Christ. Like no one comes to the Father except through Christ. Wow. What does that mean? Because I'm going to pick up my cross and find out. And for 2 years, I wrestled with my own demons. And it was so much because I realized how, in so many ways, I had focused and fixated on self-reliance that I hadn't really developed and I hadn't nurtured this relationship for decades because of how my life's journey had taken me. And what you ultimately get to realize is it's up to you. No one can tell you what to believe. No one can convince you to do something. I mean, people can convince you, but then if you say, well, they told me to do this, it's still on you. You're the one who made the decision to accept to do it. And so part of what you begin to realize is the integration of who I am. And especially if I believe in the higher power and in the Judeo-Christian perspective, it's not about that Jesus died for our sins. It's about he raised himself from the dead because that's the model we're supposed to emulate. Like, the whole premise of the Bible story is the reunion of heaven and earth, a new creation, new heaven and new earth. And so when you look at it from that frame, it almost becomes like, okay, well, who do I get to become? And you have to accept that the uncertainty and the unknown is going to be a part of the fog of life. And your ability to have an extraordinary life is a reflection of how much uncertainty you can deal with. And yet ultimately what you kind of realize is the whole point of those tests of uncertainty or being scared is overcoming that fear, is being greater than the fear. It doesn't mean you get rid of it, because part of that, it's still a part of who you are. It means you don't listen to that voice. You choose another voice. And what you come to realize is both fear and faith are made up. They're both imagined. Like you could say, well, my gosh, I saw that, I saw a newspaper article that the Russians are talking about nuclear weapons now that Ukraine bombed all their airplanes yesterday. Oh my gosh, nuclear weapons, that could be horrible. Like there's no telling that's going to happen. You can't worry about that anyway. It's beyond your control. You can choose fear or you can choose faith. Whichever one you choose is going to grow. And so a lot of the journey is facing those fears to overcome their energy, and then kind of learn the lesson from what it's trying to teach you so that you develop a stronger muscle of faith.
I mean, right there, you just hit on a lot of it of picking up your cross. And then the problem most people have is they're feeding the wrong stuff inside them. That's where a lot of the limiting beliefs and the anxiety and a lot of the mental health issues are coming from.
Well, and part of that comes from, we condition ourselves, and we're conditioned at an early age to seek authority outside ourselves. It's especially, in the United States, I think we have a tremendous sense of our parents tell us what to do. Then it's our teacher telling us what to do. If we go to church, it's someone there telling us what to do. If we go to summer camp, it's someone there telling us what to do. And we consistently have developed a culture where we're looking for someone else's permission, or we're looking for someone else's validation. And what you kind of have to realize, it's not about them, it's about me. Like even I remember, and I've had, even within the last year, I've had this conversation with a good friend of mine who's been with me. We met at a Tony Robbins event in October of 2021 when I was at a really low point, because trying to conceive of what this story was about, that eventually became Love Letters to the Virgin Mary. I wasn't just looking at Christianity. I was looking at Judaism. I was looking at Islam. I'm like, this is all got to be connected somehow. It's all got to be, there can't be, like, I just finished reading David Bentley Hart's book, That All Shall Be Saved. And the premise of his book is, if a God that is omnipotent would create a soul that it knows is going to suffer for eternity, that says something horribly cruel about that God. And so the premise of the book is, no, Jesus saves everyone. And that's kind of what I was looking at as I wrote this book. And I remember telling my friend, I'm like, just conceiving of this book I get to own it. Whatever that means, whatever that for future, for whatever, I get to own that. And he's like, yeah, you do. And that to me has also been a reminder of, it's up to me. Like I get to participate in my own rescue. I'm not waiting for someone to throw me the life preserver and then pull me in. No, I'm going to swim. If the life preserver is thrown, I'm going to swim to it. But I realize that my sense of self-reliance and resilience is my greatest strength, because it comes from a place of having faith that Christ is who he says he is, and understanding just how powerful that really is.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on a little bit right there, that having faith, like, what does that mean to you?
It can mean a lot of different things. I think in one sense, it means belief in that which is unseen, right? And in some ways, that is the heart of creation. If you read Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, and you can even find this online, there's a great story of Henry Ford, the guy who made Ford Motor Company. And he went to his engineers, and he's a practitioner of the law of attraction, as I've explained it in reference to Christ and praying for what you want, like it's already been received. And he went to his team of engineers and he said, I want to create an 8-cylinder engine out of one block of metal. And they're like, you're crazy. That's never been done. It's impossible. And he said, let me know when you've got it. So like 6 months later, he comes back and like, we're telling you, this is impossible. It can't be done. And he's like, I'm going to have that engine block and you're going to get to it. Let me know when you're done. This went on for 18 months. And lo and behold, they created the 18-cylinder engine block, or 8-cylinder engine block. So a lot of it is the ability to persist in an idea, even if the world around you says it can't be done. You can't do that. That's impossible. Forget it. You're wasting your time. If you think about a lot of the success stories of people, they all have that in common. If you've heard the story of Sylvester Stallone and how he got Rocky and how he became Sylvester Stallone, he sold his dog for food, to get money for food, to a guy for like $35. And then he went home because he was so despondent. He was watching this boxing match on TV, and he got so inspired that he wrote the screenplay for Rocky in like 3 days. And then he had some contact, and he gave it to somebody, and they're like, yeah, this is great. We'll buy it off you for $50,000. And he's like, oh, that's amazing. And he's like, but oh wait, I'm Rocky. I'm Rocky. And they're like, oh no, you're not gonna be Rocky. Forget it. No deal. So this went on for a couple of weeks, and he was insistent that he was going to be Rocky, and they were insistent not. And then a couple of months goes by, and they call him back after not talking to him, and like, okay, let's talk. And he's like, am I going to be Rocky? And like, let's just talk. Let's talk about it. So they pull him in. They said, we wanted Ryan O'Neal to be Rocky, but we really like the screenplay, and we'll offer you, I think $125,000. You can be Rocky, and we'll make this thing happen. And so it turns out, so that's how he got his start. And then like he bought his dog back for, I want to say it was either $3,000 or $13,000. And the guy that he sold his dog to is in the movie with the dog. So faith is the ability to persist in something even when the rest of the world doesn't believe in you, because in some ways it's not that everyone doesn't want to see you succeed. There might be some people like that, but it's like you get to realize that the ability to create who you are and who you potentially have always been in terms of remembering your divine identity, that's something that only you can do. And what you begin to realize is, like for me, I've gotten to the point, and a lot of it I use incantations. Like I do incantations when I drive, and we can talk about those in a second, but I see the light of Christ in everyone. And having that level of certainty, I don't have to think about, it's not that I need to convince someone that they need to believe what I believe. Let me understand what they believe and see if they're stuck in something and help them get unstuck. Because if I can help them on their journey, I'm serving Christ. So in some ways, faith becomes this level of certainty that what is unseen can be made real, and what is previously impossible, I can make possible. And it's just that fortification of your inner sense of absolute certainty, knowing that you are guided by something higher than yourself.
Yeah. Like, I love how you touched on some of that stuff. Like, that there's going to be a lot of people that don't believe in you. Yeah. And I've kind of come to realize that God brings that friction into your life, all that doubt and everything, to get you to rise higher, to actually have more faith.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and that's what and it takes a while sometimes to realize, like it's taken me a while to get some of those lessons. Like there's some times it's like, oh, but the beauty of it is the lesson will keep showing up until you get it.
You get it right.
Yeah. It's almost like a video game. It's almost like a video game. I can't get through this boss level to the next boss level until I figure this one out. And the pattern will repeat until you realize, oh, it's not about them. It's about me. I need to change. And when you make that shift in awareness, and I've had some beautiful moments where that's happened, where it's been like, oh, and I remember I got the message instantly. I'm like, oh my gosh, I just made a mistake. And I realized what the mistake was. That's because there's like there is a higher power. There's a higher consciousness. And for me, that's Christ's consciousness.
Yeah. And like I said, that's why I tell people, I was like, history has a funny way of repeating itself. So you better find each weakness you have and start fixing them.
Well, and that is so true. There's a great book called The Fourth Turning that came out in 1997. And these two authors had done research into 500 years of Anglo-Saxon history. And they found out that there's patterns through history that repeat. And in 1997, they predicted in their book there would be a pandemic in 2020.
That's so crazy.
It's amazing.
So you were just talking about incantations. I mean, I know what they are. Can you explain to the audience what they are?
Yeah. So, and it's drawn from the Bible, and I picked this up from Neville Goddard, who was a companion or peer of Napoleon Hill. So he wrote in the early 1900s. But he's got a couple books about feeling of the secret, and he really talks about focusing in on Jesus's I am statements. So Moses has the burning bush, and Yahweh says, tell the Israelites that I am sent you to speak on my behalf. And then Jesus talks about before Abraham was, I am. And so the idea is that I am is at the core of everyone's identity. Anything you say I am of, you become. So if I say I'm a genius, I'm a genius. I say it over myself, I'll start becoming a genius. If I say, oh, I'm an idiot, I shouldn't have done that, I'm so stupid, then that's going to become part of my identity too. So, and usually what you hear is initially affirmations. So people say, I am smart, I am lovable, I am gratitude, I'm grateful, whatever the case may be. And affirmations are good. The difference between affirmations and incantations is emotion. And it's not just about, oh, I'm going to say something louder. There is a physiological effect that we're trying to create here. So when you say, so if I say, for example, I am a genius, that's an affirmation. If I say, I am a genius, that's an incantation, because there's more emotion that goes into it. And what that does is a couple things. One, it starts to release endorphins and other hormones and chemicals into your body, which through powerful emotion, we start to feed ourselves this cocktail of happiness. The other thing it does is it starts to fire neurons in your nervous system. So if the easiest example is shoelaces. By now, we've tied our shoes 1,000,000 times in our life. And so we have developed a neural connection in our nervous system for tying our shoes. It's not like I have to sit there and put my shoe on and say, okay, one lace goes over the other lace. I make a little twisty, I make some loops, and then I cinch it down. I don't have to do that anymore because I got it figured out. I figured it out, 50 something years ago. There are levels of mastery that we want to achieve. And there's a cognitive level, there's an emotional level, and there's a physical level. So cognitively, Ryan, if I say to you, it's going to take you, let's go to New York City, and it's going to take you 45 minutes to climb all 1,300 steps to the top of the Empire State Building. You cognitively and intellectually understood what I've told you. Now let's say you actually go make the climb. It takes you the 45 minutes, but your legs are burning, your lungs are burning, you're sweating, you're like, it's just this painful process because that is a lot of steps to climb for nothing but 45 minutes. But now you have an emotional understanding of what that climb means. So there's a sense of emotional mastery. Now let's say for the next 50 days, you make that climb every single day. What's happened in your body is you've developed muscle memory for making that climb. It's the same thing with like basketball players like Steph Curry, LeBron James. They practice for hours every day, taking hundreds of shots to develop the muscle memory. And incantation is the same thing. So if I say 50 times a day for the next 20 days, I am a genius, I am a genius, I am creating a neural connection in my body that says I am a genius. And then what happens is my body starts to say, okay, well, what does genius mean? Let's figure out what genius means. Okay, so now that's part of our personality. So now we don't look at wasting our time doom scrolling on Instagram, or now we don't look at YouTube videos till 2 o'clock in the morning because we're a genius. We don't do those things. What do geniuses do? They do this X, Y, and Z. So incantations. And so what I do, honestly, and I learned this again from Tony Robbins, and I figure since he's a billionaire who loves serving people at the highest level, he must be doing something right. But he'll talk about, if you listen to some of his videos or go to some of his events, he'll say, some of his incantations that he would do for hours at the top of his lungs while driving in Southern California. And anytime I have to take like a 15 or 20 minute drive in North Carolina, I am doing incantations. I am doing incantations at the top of my lungs because I know that it is changing my neuroplasticity. It's changing the physiology of my body. And to get to that level, then it becomes, especially if you think about it in the application of faith, then I'm not questioning. I look at so many videos on YouTube about, do people believe in the story of Jesus? Like, is the story of Jesus actual? And here's the evidence, and here's the evidence for not it. And you, okay, get past that. believe it and then move on, because once you believe it, then it opens up a whole nother can of worms, and that's like more discovery. So incantations are a really powerful way to change your nervous system and start to really take ownership for your self-talk.
Yeah. So I do a lot of mindset training with athletes, and like we do a lot of affirmations, but add like a little bit of the incantation stuff with movement and everything.
Yeah.
And that's what I understood Tony Robbins, like when he explained it, like a lot more movement and everything with compared to the affirmations where you just kind of look at yourself in the mirror.
Yeah, he'll talk. That's a great point, actually. He'll talk about sometimes he'll go for runs and he'll do affirmations while he's running, because the same thing, just what you said.
Yeah.
The fact that you're engaging your entire nervous system by running, and you're doing that incantation, it fires more of your nervous system. So that's a great point too. And it is, I mean, there's somewhat of a trade-off, because in my truck, I can yell at the top of my lungs. I don't think I can run and yell at the top of my lungs. So I'll do the incantation, but I also appreciate that that's absolutely magic. You're absolutely right to say that. Yeah.
So what kind of services do you provide for life coaching and executive coaching?
Yeah. So for me, it's really about communication and an executive presence. I work with a lot of clients who are orbiting the C-suite in their companies, or they're executives, and they want to establish executive presence. And it really comes down to your communication style, because it's not necessarily just about you communicating what you want. It's how effectively do you listen to other people? How effectively can you build rapport with other people? Because as you start to realize that there is an integrity to what we say, I mean, that's the premise of the Bible story, is that there is a logos that came to earth that taught that we are meant to incarnate that breath of spirit and breath of God within us. And when you speak from a place of integrity, what you come to realize is it's not just about what you say, it's how you say it. It's your body language. And when you're speaking from a place of integrity, all those things are going to come together. If you're not speaking from a place of integrity, where you're looking to take advantage of someone, or you're more focused on your concerns than the concerns of the company, there's incongruency that's going to show up in how you show up. And what I work with on clients is, here's how we eliminate that, by really getting you to own who you are and aligning yourself to the highest virtues of what you believe your company is about.
Yeah. Like, I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, like within leadership too, is some of them worry, they don't realize that everybody has their own way of communicating and how they learn and everything. And
absolutely. And I see that a lot when clients come in. They're like, and it's been executives who are just outside the C-suite to first-time managers. And it shows up in different ways, but it's like the first-time manager says, "Oh, I want to ask a question in a meeting, but I don't want to sound stupid." And the executive vice president outside the C-suite says, "I want to influence the C-suite, but I don't know how." And you kind of have to say, well, okay, stop making it about you. If you have an idea that is really going to benefit the company, that's how you influence the C-suite. If you have a question as a first-time manager that's going to move the discussion forward, that's how you ask the question. When you focus on the idea and your audience, everything shifts. Because if you focus on you, then you're constantly going to be looking at it's that sort of challenging tendency that we've created for ourselves to seek external validation. And that's what you have to let go of. The best speakers that I've come across are people who, they're not worried about the external validation. They're worried about getting their message out. Like Tony Robbins, I've seen him now probably, 40 or 50 times in the last 8 years. And to see him command an audience of 15,000 people in an arena is magnificent, because he's speaking from a place where he embodies what his message is. The same thing with someone like Simon Sinek. When I used to work at Cisco, John Chambers was the CEO, and he was breathtaking. Like, he was just mesmerizing, because you speak with a passion. And when you can get out of your own way, like we saw earlier about kind of overcoming yourself and realize it's not about me, it's about my message. When you get people on board with the message, then people will follow you. And that's what leadership is.
yeah. So how important has personal development and upgrading your mindset been for you on this journey?
Oh my gosh. I have how best to answer that. It's been everything. So in the military, we had to do some reading, but I got out of college, and then the first year in the Marines was spent in training. So I was an officer, so I spent 6 months at Quantico, Virginia. You learn how to be a Marine Corps officer, but you're also learning about the infantry because that's what the Marine Corps is focused on. And then after 6 months, you go to your specialty school, and I was an artillery officer, so there's lots of math, and we're blowing stuff up, which is awesome. But there's more school, and then you get done with that, and you actually get into the operating force, and you don't want to read anymore. Like you're read out. Like you want to like not be a student for a while. And then as I kind of slowly progressed through my career, I realized, well, reading's king. Like reading is clutch. And when I got two master's degrees in the Marines, and the second year program, the first class we had was a speed reading course. And so we took a week to just learn how to speed read. And then we found out why, because they would come to us and say, okay, this 300-page book on Napoleon, you need to read it by tomorrow. I'm like, okay, all right. And so you learn how to speed read really quickly. And you start to figure out what is the salient points that I need to pay attention to. As I got into corporate America, it still kind of slowed down. And then really over the last 5 years, I mean, probably so far this year, we're halfway through the year, just about. I'd say I've read 20 books. And it's not just reading, but certainly leaders are readers, right? That is a huge takeaway, is that you want to hear a book is an exploration of someone else's mind, whether it's a fiction book like Stephen King stuff, or this book on N.T. Wright or David Bentley Hart's book that I just read. It's this exploration into someone else's mind, and you want to be exposed to other people's ideas and philosophies because it deepens your own. At the same time, for the last 2 years, I've been, or really, I guess the last 3 years, I've been on the staff of Tony Robbins. So I work some of his events. I crewed for a few events. And then for the last year and a half, I've been a senior leader. And you go to the events and you're serving at the event. So you're taking care of the participants, but you're also absorbing all the information that he's sharing. And you start to realize that professional development and personal development becomes a culture. It just becomes part of who you are. So I listen to at least 30 minutes a day of a book first thing in the morning. It's what I do. And I just feed my mind with someone else's ideas and thoughts to deepen my own sense. So personal development is huge because you realize the journey never ends. Like your growth never ends. There's always more stuff coming out, especially now today with AI. Like it's quite clear that AI is making advances farther than we can, or more quickly than we can fully appreciate. And at some point we're going to have a deeper sense of that, especially when we start having, I don't know if we'll get to sentience anytime soon, but certainly when we have robots that are walking around. I mean, I know there are very respectable scientists who are saying that within the next 3 to 5 years, we could have millions of robots walking around the planet. And so that's going to be that's going to be a reality. They're already starting to outsource or phase out trucks, like the big pickup trucks or the semi rigs pulling, tractors and stuff. Those are all going to be automated soon. Taxis, that's going to be automated too. Like there's going to be a huge population of people in the Uber or Lyft driving business. They're going to be out of work because we're going to start automating those things. So I would say, personal development is so clutch, because it's much like faith, right? You want to get your mind to where you're actively consuming more information and make that part of your DNA.
I love it. And I love that practice, which leads me to a question I ask everybody that comes on here. What is one book that you would recommend to the audience about personal development or mindset?
Wow. The first one that came to mind was Think and Grow Rich. It is such a staple of, the first time I read it, I didn't read it all the way through. I got to the question about what is your purpose in life, and I stopped reading because I was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. His book though his book, I think, is probably the most groundbreaking work on the application of faith outside of church attendance. Like it is how do you activate faith to accomplish things? And to me, that's in some ways, it's a nice stepping stone of, okay, well, how do you do that? It's not, because I think, and sometimes when I look at faith today, it's about memorizing scripture, or it's about the ritual of going to church. And no, it's much deeper than that. Like, it is something, an active process. And for me, I've read Think and Grow Rich now probably at least 3 times in the past 8 years. I know there are some people who read it every year, but it's that good. And just to give people background on the book, Napoleon Hill spent 25 years interviewing 500 self-made millionaires in the United States, because he wanted to see what was the secret to their success. None of these people had, the lucky sperm club. They didn't inherit it. They all made it themselves. And the outcome of that research was the book Think and Grow Rich.
I've actually got that book sitting here on my coffee table waiting to start reading it.
Nice. That's awesome.
So how can people get a hold of you?
So I am on Instagram, David Richards Author. You can check me out there. My website is davidrichardsauthor.com. I'm just going to start updating that soon, because I've got my new book out, and I've got some courses along that are going to go with that book as well. But those are the 2 best spots to get me, to keep it simple.
Awesome. So is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to talk about?
No, this has been so fun and so engaging, Ryan. I feel like just the message of faith is a muscle. Faith is a muscle. And the more you grow it, the stronger it becomes. And you can learn from other people like Tony Robbins, Joe Dispenza, Napoleon Hill, who've done great things. You are going to realize that your expression of faith is going to be uniquely yours.
Yeah. And that's exactly where confidence comes from, is your faith. And that's what I like. Nobody understands how I help build confidence in kids. It's like, this is how, because I just believe that it's going to happen, that we're going to accomplish it. We just got to go through all the darkness first.
Yep. Absolutely.
So final question. What is one piece of advice you'd give the audience about overcoming adversity?
Life happens for you, not to you. When you truly understand what that means, you realize that everything you need is already inside of you, and you just get to wake it up.
Wow, that's very deep. Hopefully they pick up on what you're saying with it, but I understand. Well, guys, that's going to be all the time we have here. David, thank you very, very much for coming on. I mean, it's been a great honor to listen to you and talk about your faith and everything.
Likewise, Ryan, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you. Well, guys, like I said, that's all the time we have here. Remember, the only way to get what you want is go through the fire.